Excellent.
Let's do this.
Start by welcoming people as they join us and let everybody know, who's on the call and invite everybody to use the chat box to go ahead and introduce yourselves and say your name and your affiliation. That would be really great. And we'll just give everybody a couple minutes to get signed in and before we get started. So we got people from lots of different places. Aaron Short coming to us all the way from the Tall Ships America headquarters, which is great. We've got Bruce Heyman from LAMI, Los Angeles Maritime Institute. Doug Font, thanks for joining us. And Erica from Pride of Baltimore. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Fred Sitkins from the Great Lakes up in Michigan, Inland Seas. Haley Grimes from is joining all the way from Washington, I believe, right? The Seattle area, and Grays Harbor. Jeff Buchheit from Pride of Baltimore too, as well. Pete Thibault, one of our board members, and he's joining us here. And there's a couple people, Susan Vanderford too, coming from the Texas area. There's a couple people, I'm not sure I know what your affiliation is, so I look forward to hearing what that is. Please put that in the chat room. Welcome, Jillian and Stephanie. Oh, good, Inland Seas. Nice to meet you. Jillian, I think we met, so sorry about that. I'm glad to see you. And also Stephanie from Inland Seas, that's terrific. We'll give everybody a little bit more time to join in and then we'll get started. There's quite a few people who have registered for today, and I think people are going to be joining us as they can, as their schedules allow. So that's terrific. That's fine. But I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead. That's 4 minutes. That's reasonable. We can go ahead and get started, I think. I want to welcome everybody and thanks a lot for joining us again. It's great to have people come and participate in these type of learning educational events. You know, it's not the same as being able to be in the same room together and kind of talk about these things together, but it does give us a chance to ask some questions and to hear from some people who are deeply engaged in some of the activities that we're all kind of scratching our heads about. So it's a good topic today. We're talking about experiential learning, experiential training. This follows up on what we offered as a webinar a couple weeks ago with online pivoting from in-person to online education. And I think our members do a terrific job of being able to, you know, really get people into the space of virtual learning and tours and looking at the kind of activities that go on board the tall ships. But I think it's really important for us to also recognize that we are at our heart experiential. And the how to make learning online experiential, we'd all like to do a lot better job with that. And so this is something that we're going to continue to grapple with. And I've been to a couple of conferences where this is a method of, you know, this is the topic of conversation because teachers need to be able to do it. We need to do it at college and university level, and we really need to think about it in our organizations because adult learners are experiential learners as well, and so we need to think about how we can do that a little bit better. So we're really fortunate that we have two people who had a session at our annual conference in February down in Florida, who this is kind of a revival and a refresh and probably an expansion of the topic that they talked about there. Some of the activities I know that they did at the conference are not possible when you don't have a room full of people, but hopefully they'll be able to give you some tips and tools that you can use in any case. So we've got Dr. T. Grant Lewis and Captain Chris Couson with us. T has been involved in the fields of education and recreation since 1993. He was appointed in 2019 as the Director of Adventure Recreation Management at West Virginia Tech. In addition to his program oversight, he serves as a member of faculty in the role of teaching assistant professor. He's got a PhD in education with a focus in recreation, parks, and leisure studies, and an MEd in outdoor education and administration. And T is joined by Captain Chris Couson. Chris is a veteran of the U.S. Coast Guard, an alum of Maine Maritime Academy, Yukon, and the Williams Mystic Maritime Studies Program. He studied aboard this, I'm sorry, I'm messing this up. He was aboard the schooner Bowden, and he discovered his love of traditional sailing vessels. Captain Couson has served on sailing ships on both coasts of the United States and now serves as captain of the U.S. brig Niagara based in Erie, Pennsylvania. And he focuses on the immersive sail training programs on the Great Lakes. So we're really lucky to have both of these fine people be able to share with us their wisdom and help us understand a little bit more about experiential training online. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to T to get things started.
Actually, Chris, it's going to be me. I'm going to kick things off here. And then
I'm going to turn this over to Chris and get things started.
I'm going to get started here. I'm going to share my screen. It's great to be with everybody. And we are hoping to be able to, hopefully share some things that might help you as you continue to shift from doing training in person to online. So some of our goals for this afternoon are kind of just explore some of the concepts of experiential learning, provide some ideas regarding how to engage your current community and how to expand that, how to apply experiential education tools to an online format, share tools about how to deliver that training, and then really have all of you be able to walk away with at least one thing that you can use to hopefully either get started with your own online training or to just enhance it or improve it. So that's our goals this afternoon. Something we want to make sure that's absolutely clear is that we're not experts in online platforms, tools, media, technology. We're really sharing our experience from the last 6 months of having to adapt our training programs to an online format as we all deal with the current situation with the pandemic. So a lot of these online platforms that we're going to be talking about, they might not even be the best tool to use. They're just the tool that we've been using, and we'll talk about that. And then we continue to learn at best how to engage our communities and our students online. So, I imagine hopefully in the next couple of months, as I kind of re-engage to do more online programming, that we keep learning and we keep learning how to, learn more tools and how to do things to reach and engage our students. So those are some of the things we wanted to make sure we put out there, and I'll hand it off to T.
Sweet. And Chris just posted about having questions that may come up. We have built in some time for questions, both in the middle of the presentation as well as at the end. But please do not hesitate. We want to make this interactive when we can and make sure that you're getting out of it what you need to. So I'm going to cover some of just the basics that we typically explore in our side of things as far as the experiential education piece goes. And then from there, talk a little bit about some of the examples that I've done or some of what I've done. We were one of the first colleges, universities to pivot from in-class to online last spring. And so for some of us, it was a little bit easier than others, but it's still an ongoing process. And we're at a point where we're going to start classes on campus tomorrow. We don't know if that'll last or how long that will last, especially if you've seen what's been going on in the country the last couple of days. So we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to say that because Captain Chris is going to be guiding us through. So when we typically think of experiential learning, there's two ways in which we define that. One of those is the learning that we do by ourselves, and then the other is the experiential education, which we typically think about as the programs that all of us structure for other individuals, whether that's youth, whether that's adults. It could be for both, depending on who you are serving at any given time. And so as we go forward, Captain Chris, when we think about learning by ourselves, this is essentially nature's way of learning, a very informal education. The best example I can give you, and this would be awesome if I could see everybody and ask you to raise your hands if you've ever put your hand on a hot stove. Now, in most cases, when we are probably younger, we put our hands on a hot stove. We realize that's not something we want to do again. Now, in some cases, some of you may have gone back and done it again just to see if that was going to happen. Most of us probably said, all right, I'm going to make a connection between this hot stove and the fact that now my hand hurts, and I'm going to avoid that. All right, so when we think about experiential learning by ourselves, typically it's an inward reflection of the world that's going on around us. And so from that standpoint, we often provide those type of opportunities in both a structural sense, which we'll get into in a moment, and then the other opportunities, those teachable moments, those aha moments that our participants, our students have when they all of a sudden realize and something comes together between what they're doing and actually what's happening around them and the rest of their world. So let's go to the next one. So we contrast that with the idea of experiential education. And here the emphasis is placed on programs, small P programs, and activities as structured by somebody else. So when we think about experiential education, we can think about it as you running staff training, you running a specific small P, what I call small P programs for a group of participants or a group of students. In the classroom setting, it's the lesson plan that we create for a day, including the activities that we're going to do to support or reinforce the material that we're covering. And we'll get into some of these different ideas a little bit later on in the presentation. Captain Chris is going to do some nitty-gritty with what he's been doing as far as moving his staff training and some of the small P programs he's been running onto these online platforms. So again, just a difference, and both of these certainly have a place. Experiential learning, we typically think about those moments in time that we as individuals gather and internalize something that has happened, versus the idea of experiential education, which tends to be structured and put together by outside perspectives. So let's go to the next one. So when we think about outcomes of experiential education, typically experiential education is a bit of an umbrella term. And most of us think about these types of outcomes sometimes very explicitly and sometimes not explicitly. What we've seen from the research is that these bigger categories, moral development, personal growth, group development, and leadership development, are what we often see as the end result of going through an experiential education program. Now, when it comes to you as individuals and or your staff designing these small P programs for students, for participants, you don't have to have all four. You can literally just be focused on one. You could also be focused on more than one. You could be some combination of any of those four. And so really be thinking about what is the expectations that you want those individuals, part of your small P program, to come away with. What is it going to look like at the end? And so when we can put these in these types of categories, again, moral development, personal growth, group development, leadership development, it helps us to create that blueprint, because now we can start stacking up ideas for activities and the content that goes with those activities to get at those outcomes. So let's go forward. So the experiential learning cycle. We can go back a few decades to Kolb, K-O-L-B, who came up with the experiential learning cycle. What this does is essentially gives us a diagram of how we can think about individuals moving through this process. So the first step is this idea of do. All right, so Nike was not wrong, just do it. All right, we have some type of experience. As noted here, that could be some type of shipboard activity or training. It's introduced, it's performed, it's done. Now, typically when we're in an experiential environment, it's a little bit easier, but we, again, part of the reason why we're doing this webinar is to show you some ways where you can actually do through a virtual platform. So our individuals, our students, our participants have this experience. The next step is that they actively reflect on that experience. So what happened? What did they observe? What did they see? Sometimes we can get into the affective realm, which is what did they feel? And so from that standpoint, now we're starting to internalize what that concrete experience meant. Once we have some level of meaning, that reflective observation, now we move into the idea of interpretation. So what is it that we can take away from that experience? What aspects make the most sense for us as individuals? When we start doing that, then we can move on to active experimentation, which means two things. One, if we were to have this experience again, would we do the exact same thing, or would we do something differently? Go back to, as remedial as it may sound, our hot stove example. I put my hand on a hot stove and I get burned. So my hopeful reflective observation is that hurt, didn't feel good. So my idea development, that interpretation is if I put my hand on something hot, I'm gonna get burned. Not gonna feel very good. So when I come back to a concrete experience and I encounter that hot stove, I think I will take my hand away and move on to the opposite aspect, which is how do I take that and apply it to other situations? So again, the concrete experience happens. We reflect on what that means, why did it happen, what can we take away from it? We extrapolate that into idea development, and then we get into active experimentation. Will we do the same thing given the same situation, or will we do something different given the same situation? The other aspect to that with active experimentation is, can we transfer the learning that happens here to the learning somewhere else? So if we stay with our stove example, we'll make some more greater connections a little bit later. Okay, stove feels hot. All right, what else feels hot? Oh, a fire. Same idea. If we move that active experimentation, that I know if I put my hand on something hot, I'm going to get burned. Fire feels hot. I don't want to put my hand on it. So that's the idea of using the experiential learning cycle. Now, when it comes to our students, our participants, we may have to provide prompts in order to get them thinking about reflective observation and idea development. Some of our individuals who come to our small P programs may struggle with this a little bit in terms of how can they make those connections. And so one of the aspects, or one of the important pieces for us as that instructor, as that guide, as that mentor, as that leader, is to help individuals make some of those connections to what we may call, baseline. What is that baseline content, baseline of knowledge? Okay, let's go forward. All right, so as I mentioned, we have a tendency to think one way or the other. When it comes to the learning process, what we really need to think about is how do we use a variety of methods, okay? Typically, most people's mind go to the conventional methods when they think about learning. Okay? When we think about that, all right, it's often that idea that we're going to transfer, take some type of predetermined knowledge and skills, and then give that to our participants, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. There's actually been some studies about that process, or the process of how people retain the most information. And if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy in terms of a pyramid, it's very similar to that. As we move up in the levels of what methods we use, there's more likelihood that we're actually going to remember it. So right now, me just talking through most of this, because we're not able to do a lot of interaction, some of this is probably just right over your heads, or in one ear, out the other, and that's okay. Now, as we move more towards experiential learning, which is not our conventional or prescribed, but actually is an opportunity for our development as individuals. We get that opportunity to internalize. We get an opportunity to make stronger connections. So when we think about these coming together, what we can look at or examine is how do we, as again, instructors, educators, guides, facilitators, leaders, mentors, how do we take the two and combine them together? Because we don't want to discount someone's individual experience. You know, the fact is all of us, you know, looking down that we've got 18 participants plus Chris and myself, you know, there's 21 of us. All of us right now are having a shared experience, but all of us are going to learn slightly different from that experience. And we don't want to discount that. So be thinking as you look at ways to transfer what you've been doing in your programming, small P programming online, how you can do a little bit of both of these. So if we go to the next slide, I can talk through very briefly about some of the things that we've done or I've done in my classrooms. Again, we hit up to roughly spring break, which was the first week of March at WVU Tech this past spring. And that's when we were told we're not coming back to campus. Essentially, you're going to have to teach your classes online for the remainder of the semester, which for some of our classes in our program was a bit of a challenge because it's very difficult to teach virtual rock climbing. It's very difficult to teach virtual whitewater rafting. So we had to really think about which classes we were offering and how we could continue to cover that content throughout the remainder of the semester. So a few of the ideas that I'll share is doing Zoom sessions. Most of my classes, the remainder of the semester, we did Zoom class sessions. Part of that was the inclusion of the flipped classroom, was essentially giving students an assignment related in content beforehand. And then when we came together as a class, they actually were applying that to some type of problem, scenario, situation, some type of activity. So for instance, one of the classes I was teaching this past spring was a risk management legal issues class. And so we were looking at case studies around case law. And so the students were reading those cases ahead of time or reading the laws generated from those cases ahead of time. And when we came back together, it was, here's a scenario, which of these cases or which of these laws may apply in this situation. We use Google Drive quite often. It was a great way for students to be able to connect with one another. They had a number of group projects that we'd started working on at the beginning of the semester that we didn't want to lose. And so from that standpoint, setting up Google Drives with Google Docs, Google Spreadsheets, Google Slides is a great way for them to be able to connect to one another, to be able to edit each other's work, to be able to give feedback. And that worked fantastically for us. So it was taking essentially what we would have done in the classroom in terms of giving feedback or working together in small groups, but moving it to the outside and allowing them to work on it on their own. We also did some videos. And so one of my classes was a nature interpretation class. The students in that class were having to do teaching topics around certain principles of interpretation. And so they had done 2 in the classroom. They still had 2 more to do. And so one of those was to create a PowerPoint slide and then create the audio track to it, thinking about if they were to go to a museum or potentially an archaeological site. You know, you may not have somebody who's leading you through, but you may have some type of audio. Then the last video they had to create, which very similar to what Captain Chris is going to get into later, was actually walking through some type of specific topic. And in this case, it was a teaching skill. And so that gave them 2 different approaches about how to do what we would have done just in the classroom. And we were able to view those and then turn around and critique. Last 2 that I'll talk about really briefly, I had them utilize some outside resources. We did some virtual touring. So we went to museums, we went to national parks that the National Park Service or certain museums had set up on their websites. And so we were able to experience it virtually and then come back as a group and talk about what we had seen, and what people connected to, because we were all seeing the same videos, we were all taking the same tour, but there were different aspects that people were connecting to. And then the last was just similar to this, was either us hosting webinars or roundtables or sending students out to go to a webinar or roundtable being given by someone else in the field, such as the ones that we're doing right now. So those are some of the ways that I adapted to the pandemic, shifted training and engagement from the classroom setting to the online setting. So if we go to the next slide, we'll take just a few minutes if there are any questions that have come up. And then if there's not, we can roll through the next couple slides before we get to Captain Chris.
So thanks for that, T. I just want to check in with you on a couple of things. There is a question I have, which is, you mentioned, like, through the experiential learning cycle, the idea that there is reflection is a key part of learning. And when you're working in a virtual environment, the reflection, to make sure that that key component of learning is happening, how do you make sure that you're checking in well with students to make sure that they're engaging and having some reflection time? So it's not just an isolated kind of activity for them.
Right, and usually when we think about reflection, most people think about journaling, and journaling is great. What ends up happening a lot of times when we say reflect on the experience, they'll just say, oh, well, first, Captain Chris gave us a rope. Then he talked about a knot, as opposed to what are you really getting out of it? So finding ways for prompts in writing, potentially even in drawing. It doesn't have to be so structured and formalized where students are writing out paragraphs or your individuals are writing out paragraphs or participants. It can just be words. It can just be what they were drawn to. Because as individuals, we learn in lots of different ways. I have sometimes allowed students, as I mentioned, to do their reflection as drawings. Getting into touch with creative mediums. When you have group settings or even individually, you can do, quick video, we talk about these as testimonials. And I would imagine most individuals have one of these, we carry around almost all the time, where you can do a 10, 15-second clip of yourself just saying, here's what I'm walking away with. And then allowing those to be heard by other folks. So does that help with that? Okay. All right, let's go forward then, keep the train rolling. So here's where we're gonna start connecting into really moving things from not the virtual realm to the virtual realm, from the real world to the virtual realm. What we have found and what Captain Chris and I did at a TSA conference was looking at how to start creating connections and community. And one of the challenges moving into this virtual atmosphere is that we can lose some of that idea of community building. We don't have to, though. And so when we start thinking about early activities to start connecting individuals, what we have found is that when they do connect to others, they're more likely to be successful long-term, because they're more likely to, one, not feel like they're doing something alone, and two, are more likely to feel that they have some type of ownership and investment in the programs, small P programs that you're running. So be thinking about potentially, and again, we're going to do some examples, and Captain Chris is going to get into those, about how you can start out early. Oftentimes, just really quickly, circles come up, and we ask everybody to stand in a circle and just say who you are and where you're from. And by the time we go around the circle, when we're in the reality, you've probably zoned out by the time you get to the 15th or 16th, or maybe even the third person, depends. So be thinking about ways in which you can start connecting people early on. One of the things I've seen is that when you have a Zoom meeting and you have everybody up, and let's say I'm in the left-hand box, whoever's below me, that's the person I asked to go next, rather than just leaving it out there and everybody sitting there waiting for somebody to go. So think about ways in which you can create connections at the start of your online virtual trainings. So let's go next slide. Sequencing. Best way to think about sequencing, and this goes back, is if we were to ask everybody on that very first time we got on a call, you'd never seen these people before, you didn't know anything about them, and you said, all right, tell me something about your deepest, darkest fear. Most people are going to shut down. So what we need to think about is the old adage of we've got to learn to crawl before we can learn to walk, before we can learn to run. So as you start thinking about not only how you connect people, but even the content and the activities that you're going to do around your training, what's the sequence? What order do you need to do those in order to set them up for success? Okay, so the idea of sequencing is simply being able to build on previous skills to increase the likelihood of success, which means to increase the likelihood of learning, which means then to increase the likelihood that we can transfer to other areas, that active experimentation in the experiential learning cycle. So next slide. Most of us are familiar with this, the idea of a comfort zone where we are in a place that we feel safe. Oftentimes in that comfort zone, little to no learning happens because we're already pretty good with where we're at. On the opposite end of the spectrum is our panic zone. This is where people either typically will shut down or will become almost combative because that's the way they're dealing with their fear. And when we get into that zone, or our individuals get into that zone, there's very little learning that can happen because their focus is more on that fight or flight survival. So really what we're trying to get people is to push into what we call the stretch zone. And that's where the most learning is going to happen. That is that idea of sequencing so they can build tools to continue to meet those challenges and be successful. So if we go to the next slide, we'll get that as a visual representation where we can see how those play out. So we want to get students, individuals, participants to step out of comfort zone, but not get so far to their panic zone. And so the reality is, because we've got a variety of individuals who come to us, their comfort zones are going to be all over the map. And so you really have to start connecting people to be thinking about, okay, where are people within, almost that bell curve? Somebody's here on this is really comfortable, or somebody may find something that we're doing really out of their comfort zone, and how do we bring those back to the middle? But know that as you do these connecting activities, that you build a sense of community, that you get your participants, your students engaged, they're more likely to be willing to move into that stretch zone. They're also going to be more likely to be comfortable enough to say, whoa, that's moving me into a panic zone. Otherwise, the unfortunate reality is we get sometimes groupthink, which is almost not quite to the mob mentality, but I'm not comfortable speaking out for what I need because I don't really feel comfortable and connected to these people. And then all of a sudden we can get somebody in the real world hurt. So again, come back and think about how you sequence the activities, not only connect individuals, but then also build into your content and your other activities. So next slide, which I think is where Captain Chris is going to come.
What next? Thank you, T. So yeah, I'm going to kind of keep building on this and keep talking about how building that community and sequencing to make people feel comfortable. So one of the first things you can do after you kind of do the first activities, we're thinking about a group that you'll see multiple times. Maybe you're doing multiple sessions with trainees at different age groups. An online community agreement can be a way of shifting from what you could do on a ship to online, which is, having the students or trainees or whoever is participating in your online session really become involved and have ownership of kind of like the culture that you want to build through the online community that you're striving to do. So first you'd have individuals kind of take some time about what norms or conduct that you would want to have online. You can use shipboard terminology for things. And then after you give participants some time to think about that, you can utilize breakout rooms, and we'll talk more about that, to produce and have individuals talk in smaller groups where they might feel more comfortable in terms of talking about, different ways that people should act together, what you want to get out of a certain thing, those type of things in a breakout room. And then after you give some time for that, you can get groups together and actually produce a group agreement for your online sessions or your course. And then you can have different ways of having students, say, sign it virtually, whether you put it in a Google Doc and have them put their name down or things like that, but really try to build a sense of ownership in your students, in particular students you're going to be doing multiple sessions or multiple classes with. And then another aspect of kind of sequencing and building to another level is kind of this idea of storytelling, because as we start telling our stories, we start reflecting on our experiences, they really become part of our memories and become part of who we are. So utilizing story as a way to kind of bring students together. So one idea, one concept you could use is have students take notes about a short story of a challenge that they experienced, and then put them in breakout rooms and have them start sharing that story with each other. And through that storytelling, you're going to learn a lot more about each other than if just say, okay, I'm from here, I go to this school, and my favorite food is ice cream. So the idea is just to have people share more about themselves, and not only is that good for those who are hearing the story and learning about others, but also really good for that individual, and then obviously for the group cohesion. So this is effective when you're able to do training in person, but it's also can be effective on an online platform. And then when you get back into the main room, you could have a few volunteers share their experience, to really kind of just finish off the whole kind of the training session. So that brings me to kind of shifting the paradigm. So me in particular, as a ship's captain, my focus on Niagara has been sail training, and that's what we do in the summer is we have 2-week sail training programs. And then quickly this winter, I had to take the volunteer programs that we were still doing, and we also have an in-person winter sail training program that we were doing on our site in our shop. But once the pandemic hit, we had to shift that very quickly. And so that's kind of shifting that paradigm. And I'm going to talk a bit about kind of the nit and gritty about how I've been doing it. And I would just, again, say that the way I've been doing it might not even be the best way or the most effective or the best tools. It's just how I did it. And I continue to learn how to do it better. There's lots of online platforms that you can use. And I'm sure many of us on here have done many of these. You have online platforms you can use for meetings and different training. You can also have different course platforms that you can set up for be more formal, where you want to have different things people can turn in, different ways of formalizing those courses. But really what you need to do is just kind of taste things, figure it out, check things out, look for what's going to work for your community and for your goals. Very quickly on, I think in the pandemic for me, I wasn't aware of Zoom until I believe it was Calmer Nickel. I saw them working with Zoom with some of their volunteers, and it seemed like it could be a platform that might work for me and our goals. So I checked it out, and some of the features that I like, and this definitely isn't a advertisement for Zoom, it's just the platform I've been using for a lot of things. It's widely used. Also for us as an institution, very quickly on, we had to scale back. And so we didn't want to spend a lot of money. And so accounts can be month to month. There's good integration with calendars. One of the things I like for training wise, there's a share screen feature and a whiteboard so that, when you go into the Zoom session, you can go and you can point out something that you really want to emphasize. And I want to emphasize breakout rooms. So I can use that. I can clear pretty quick and move on, but it's something that I can do to, on my presentation to make it more interactive and also emphasize things I want to touch on. Breakout rooms are something I'm going to go a little bit more to, but that's something that's really helpful to get groups into smaller pairings so that they feel more comfortable talking as a group. and they can get more value out of that. You can record on your computer or in the cloud. There's a webinar account that you can add on, and then you can go live in different social media platforms, which I've also used recently. Some of the things that I did early on, I mentioned that we have a volunteer group. So we have a little over 100 volunteers, probably more like 120. And we also had a winter sail training program, which were just individuals from the community who were coming down and participating in some training. So very quickly on, once we were no longer able to get together, I continued our weekly volunteer meetings that we do on Saturday mornings, but we just did that online. And I used the breakout method to kind of connect people in that way. Also continued the volunteer and winter sail training online. I've been continuing to do a daily coffee break meeting with our volunteers who were used to coming down to our site, working with our staff every single day. I knew they were going to be missing something. So every day at 10:30, we have a daily coffee break where people just come, we chit chat about things, and then that's the meeting. We had some volunteers organize a book club, which was really great, and that's ongoing. And we're going to continue that in the fall, and it's just an opportunity to talk about something other than the pandemic. And I also did a 6-week online sail training course through Zoom webinar. I think in the future, I'll do that just through a meeting so I can have more interaction with students and they can have more interaction with me. But the webinar, that went pretty well. And we didn't charge for the course, but we did ask for donations about halfway through. And we did, I think, receive $900 in donations from that course, which isn't a lot. But you know, when you're trying to find new income and trying to engage with the public, we thought that was pretty good. And then we've been recently doing a fundraising campaign, and we've been doing online discussions and Q&As through this format. So that's been pretty helpful. Some things to think about as you're setting up for your meeting. Obviously, building on what T was talking about, thinking about the community that you want to set up, the goals that you're going to have, how do you sequence that, what outcomes do you want to come out from it. PowerPoint is useful to set up kind of the baseline, but definitely try to figure out to literally think outside the box. So how can you demonstrate things? How can you also show things without having it be, you know, a two-dimensional? Are you able to use your ship to demonstrate? Are you able to use it as an online platform? I'll talk a little bit about what I've been able to do, and then practice using tools online. Technology involved, always do a test run, and I'll talk about that again. You never want to be in a situation where you didn't do a test run and that one thing doesn't work, and then suddenly you're kind of caught aback. So always recommend doing practice and doing a test run, and then make sure you're setting expectations early on. So making sure that people are recognizing what they're trying to get out of this, and then utilize breakout rooms and icebreakers to really connect people. So one of the things I do want to mention about hosting is that you are the host. I think a lot of times in more traditional sail training platforms, you know, all the crew members have their different positions, and when you're initially having trainees come in, there's a little bit of that host and a little bit of that kind of getting everybody on the same page, but then the natural kind of workings of the ship and culture and things take over. Where I think in every Zoom meeting or training you do, you always have to recognize you're the host. You need to make sure things move along and make sure things are happening properly and effectively. So one of those tools that I've used is breakout rooms. So whenever we have a volunteer muster every Saturday morning, after we do some of the community notice stuff, we'll get into breakout rooms. So I'll always give kind of a prompt to our volunteers, whether it's you know, a topic to discuss, something that made them smile that week, all these different things that can help them kind of start the conversation. And you definitely want to make sure you pick whatever you want to use as your prompt, depending on what your goals are and how you're going to sequence those trainees. So, or those participants, whether it's the first time they're all meeting together or whether they've done it 10 times. It's helpful, especially early on, to ask someone to lead. So you don't necessarily have to pick that person, but ask somebody who's going to be in a breakout room to lead. So it's pretty much giving somebody permission to do that, to kind of help. And then you can do that idea where they pick the next person, and then the next person who talks picks the next person. So it's a little bit more ground roots in that way. And then give an icebreaker, discussion topic. I've been doing a lot of quizzes with our volunteers early on when I was still doing the spring sail training. Some ideas that I've used as icebreakers in breakout rooms. Like I said, what made you smile this week? What surprised you? I've done a lot of group quizzes where I've done labeled sails, labeled rigging. We've done some home scavenger hunts where you have a minute to go find some items, and then that gives you an opportunity to tell a story about those, and that helps connect people. We've done some trivia, and then most recently this past week, I did 2 truths and a lie, which I think some people kind of rolled their eyes at me at first, but then I was in and out of break rooms, and I found that it definitely brought some similar conversations to when we did the home scavenger hunts. So I think that really gets people going as well. And there's lots of ideas out there. I saw plenty when I just Googled this. So definitely something to just do your own research, figure out, come up with ideas, the way to connect people. And this is kind of some of the activities I've done online with our trainees and volunteers: scavenger hunt, a sailing class, navigation, marlin spike. They're just different ways of engaging depending on what you're trying to get across. I have some things I've done in terms of hacking and making it easier for me, at least, to make sure that the training I'm doing is valuable. Is making sure that I know what the viewer or the participant is seeing from their perspective. So one of those is making sure or having a laptop or a computer that you can connect with, and then also using your phone. That allows you, one, to be able to kind of manage the Zoom meeting on your computer, but you're able to use your phone as a way of kind of breaking away from the desk and engaging with the student, whether that's on your ship or if you're trying to demonstrate something and you have a setup with a tripod. I also use whiteboard on photos during a presentation that, like I said, emphasize certain points, other tools, and then the record feature also helps. So there's many times when I'm setting up something that I hadn't done before, I'll record it, do the thing, stop, go back, watch it, and see what it looked like. So definitely, this is something to keep playing with, keep trying out, keep practicing. Here I want to kind of show, and I'll get back to my shared screen here. I'm just going to kind of show some things I've done with PowerPoint. So like I said, I don't know if PowerPoint is the best tool. It probably isn't. But one of the things I've done using PowerPoint is, well, how do I show a ship going off the dock? Well, one of those things you can do, I found, is you can create your own ship using just regular tool here, our PowerPoint. Insert shapes. You can do a lot of different things. And that allows you to kind of be a little bit more demonstrative, a little bit more show than just tell. And so I was doing a class in terms of talking about dock lines, how to get a ship underway. Right now I have this all grouped together, but I can ungroup it. And then I can play around with the different pieces. Let's say I want to make sure the fenders come off when I'm doing the demonstration. And, I'll do different things like, okay, getting underway, we want to get the bow out. What's a sequence of taking in lines? Then we leave that quarter spring. And then you got to make sure I group it all again. And then you can use it to kind of demonstrate using that quarter spring to get the bow out. So that's one thing I've done. Another is using PowerPoint to create labeled drawings or labeled pictures. So get back to that. You can insert a shape, an arrow. This is something I've done for so many Saturdays. If I want to point out the head of a sail, I can change the color, the weight, and these are all different tools you can kind of use. I've also set it up where I've taken each individual and I've just set up letters. I'll show that here now, where I've set up different labels, and those are the quizzes that I'm using for our volunteers or for our trainees to kind of quiz them each other or work together in those breakout rooms to come up with the answers. So it's another way of kind of just engaging and having them talk together, but also reaching that goal of continuing on with learning the ship and learning the rigging. So I found this to be very helpful tool. One way I figured out how to demonstrate some of the skills I wanted to, in particular, knot tying, chart work, was I created this way of using my phone to have a top-down kind of viewpoint so that people could see it as I would see it if I'm doing, say, a knot tying. So what I did is I had a tripod for my phone. Go back. I had a tripod for my phone that I was able to set up, but to make sure that it wasn't going to fall over, I counterweighted that with some books on the other side. I just had it on a board. It was a simple, like 1x10, 36 inches long. Had it on a stand on a table, and then that was allowed me to do some demonstrations and have those who are participating be able to see what I was doing. And another level to this would be to have those participants have the line in their hands, go over the knots, go over whatever type of demonstration you're trying to do, have a chart in front of them as well, and be able to kind of work through whatever questions they have by being able to see what you're actively doing. Here are some examples. So these are screenshots from some of the videos that I've done recently for our sail training course. So I was doing some knots with that overhead view, some ship maneuvering with tacking and wearing ship with a model that we had, doing some chart work and talking about some of the aspects of navigation. And I found all these really helpful to have set up where I would be able to do that and demonstrate that. Also, if you're able to use your ship to demonstrate, unfortunately, I'm not able to use Niagara or Letty right now for training. And so what I can use is we're really looking in the Erie Maritime Museum. We have a model of Niagara's Topgallant and Royal sails. So I was able to use that as a demonstration tool. And so essentially what I had was a tripod and I had some good audio so that as I was walking away from the camera and was pointing out certain things, or I was setting the sails or taking them in, the audio was good. So that's one thing I would recommend that you look into is making sure that you have a plan for the audio that you'll do for your videos to make sure that your participants can hear you, as well as if you're recording, it'll be valuable for that. So with that technology involved, like I said, always do a test, do some practice. A second device is great if you have another friend who can watch. But I like being able to see it myself to make sure that I know what it's going to look like as well. So I just recommend to always do a test run. Some of the resources that I've had or procured just to make it easier, we have a Zoom account that's pro, $15. I did get that webinar add-on for the 6-week online course, but like I said, I don't believe I'm going to do that again because I want to have more interaction with the participants in the course. I'm using PowerPoint a lot. I use my smartphone as that way to demonstrate things that aren't on my computer. I did purchase a phone tripod, which is in the top picture there. I found it really excellent. It's pretty inexpensive, and it's a way to hold your phone steady. And then again, I tied it down to a board to figure out how to do certain things. And you can take that tripod or that phone attachment and put it on a regular camera tripod if you have an attachment, which I have here. I had to get a adapter, which was a 3/8 female to a 1/4 inch male, just to make sure I was able to do that. And that's what I used for a lot of my sessions when I was in the museum working with our sails or a model in there. You can get inexpensive wireless mics. I went for one that was more top of the line personally. I bought this on my own, and you just want to make sure you have something that's going to work and be decent quality. And so you can get mics that are under $100 that will work for you and be good quality as well. And just to connect the wireless mics to the camera, the phone, I had to get a little bit of a adapter for that. So that's really all I had to do the course and pretty much what I'll do moving forward. So it's been working pretty well for my needs and for our training needs. So There's lots of different options. This is just what I did, and so I just recommend do your own research. Watch YouTube, look at reviews, and that's kind of how I got to this point with my tools. We do have a website that we're using for our online sales training course. So you're welcome to check that out. Our first course offering to see what I did and what it sounds like, what it looks like. That's at learnfnl.com. There's a tab for online sales training, and the password is FNL online. And it's actually wrong here. It's I'll actually change that real quick and give you the correct password here. FNL online, all lowercase, which is important if you actually want to get onto that webpage. So, but feel free to send me an email or through Chris, and we can definitely get you linked up with that just to check out what we've done so far. I think we're back to the Q&A part. Chris?
Great. Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you for that as well. I mean, that's great. And, I definitely need to figure out how to be more creative with the use of whiteboard in Zoom, because I think that would make a difference. I think I'm going to go ahead and jump in with another question that I have, because I think this is an interesting thing. A lot of what these programs have they're presenting information. How do you ensure that people are engaging with the information? What kind of feedback are you getting from the people, either the volunteers that you're working with or the people in your classes or whatever, that give you a chance to kind of take a look at how well are we engaging? Oftentimes what I see is, particularly in a Zoom format, even a Zoom meeting, you have the people who are kind of in and out of engagement, and you know that that's happening. So what are you doing to make sure that you're keeping on top of that?
What I'd say I love about the breakout rooms is it takes you out of the equation. So when you have a prompt or you have that quiz or that whatever thing you want to do in the breakout rooms, I find that an excellent way to have the students engage with each other. And I'm out of the process. I'm able to go in, drop in, hear what they're talking about, and throw in my tidbit if I feel like I want to. But I think that's a really great resource for taking the person who's at the front out of the equation, or the trainer out of the equation, and let them work through different situations. I also think the demonstration side, where you're doing the knot tying, or like, let's say you're doing chart work, if you can set up a program where those students who are participating have purchased a chart, have purchased all the tools, and so they are looking at what you're presenting, and that's the chart, and then you're going through all the skill levels and all the different levels of learning how to navigate on a chart, but they're doing it on themselves as well. You're just leading them, and then you would have questions. I was teaching a navigation class, a series of classes to our volunteers. We went through the basics of chart work, and we ended up getting into LAN, local apparent noon. And obviously we're not in a situation where we can get together and use sextants right now, but we got to the point where they were doing some of the math and the calculations for doing sunrise, sunset, getting into local apparent noon. So I think that is a way to engage. You just have to do it different ways. And that's what I think is I think in terms of doing like knots and fancy knots, marlinspike seamanship, whether it's doing splicing, I think you can have participants give resources for people to obtain those tools. And then when they have those tools, then you can do the session. I did do a ditty bag class with some volunteers this spring, and that's what we did. I gave people 2 weeks. They got all the equipment they would need. They got the canvas, the needles, the rope palms, all that type of stuff. And then we got into it. People did it at their own in their own time. So everybody was at different levels. But each week I was introducing a new skill to eventually we have volunteers who made some amazing ditty bags. And so there's different ways of doing that. And that's what I would say is just be creative in those different ways and those tools. Would you have anything to add, T?
I would say very similar to what Chris was talking about. For me, I'm very fortunate to have smaller classes. And so for that, using that flipped classroom model where here's something that you've got to do before we get to class. Because if you're not doing what you need to do to prepare, you're not going to be able to contribute. And it's going to be obvious. As again, I'm looking at classes where I've got 3, 4, 5 students right now. But even thinking about some of my larger classes, when we've been together and not on an online platform, it's the same thing. You know who's not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And so it's really hard. Another great way when you have that interaction with participants in Zoom is to put a question out there and ask them to respond, via the chat function or, and just respond to you as the instructor or the host. So then they're not just copy and pasting what somebody else said. And so then that way you can find out, and then just that quick check-in, are they listening to what's going on, and are they in tuning in to what you're trying to do? So.
You're on mute there, Chris. Classic.
Oh gosh. Test out the technology. Thanks everyone. No, I think it's really great stuff, and I really appreciate both of your perspectives about it. And I think it's, as we're dealing with this, we're looking to the future. Is this going to be something that we're going to be dealing with? What's your feeling about it, both in a community education environment and a formal education environment?
I think, in terms of where we are right now, I think at least for the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to be having to shift into this as some people have been able to do some programming, but obviously with the shift of the season, they'll be focused on online stuff as the pandemic kind of shifts into a new phase with the flu season and the cold weather. People are going to be inside again, so there'll be more, more demand for online engagement and tools. And then I think in the future, really, once we are able to get as a society past the pandemic or whatever the new normal will be then, I think this is a tool that we can use to actually engage more people. So I think it will be a benefit to our programming, on our ships, because we'll be able to reach more people even when we're underway, I think. So I think we're going to continue to learn, continue to adapt. I think what I know now will be overshadowed with what I hope I learn over the next 6 months as I continue to do these programs. So yeah, I think we're all continuing to learn, continue to be creative, and trying to, engage our communities as best we can.
I would agree exactly with what Chris said. I think this is going to become, for the next 6 to 8 months, the fallback. I mean, we're already seeing it in education and in more of a formal education setting. And what's nice in some ways is that it does allow us, to cast the net wider and be able to potentially reach more people. I think hopefully too, when it comes to the more formal education that we do, that it provides some opportunity for some educational reform about how we can get tools into people's hands, because they may not be able to come to us. And I think one of the aspects that I've learned in the almost 30 years that I've been in the recreational field and education is we've had a tendency to think about people coming to us, and in some cases they can't, but how do we get to them? And by being able to make some changes in the way we deliver the information and the experiences that we offer, we'll be able to do that. And people, we'll be able to see, more diversity in some of the small P programs and the classes that we run. We'll be able to, be on Lake Erie, but meeting people in Texas or meeting people on the other side of the country or the other side of the world. And so I think, this has the opportunity to really change in positive ways what we have been doing. And I don't think, and I hope that it doesn't replace what we've been doing, but I hope it becomes something that enhances what we're doing.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is a pivot that we're going to not pivot away from for a while. So it will make us stronger and better with what we can offer in any case and how many people we can reach. I agree with that. There's a quick question for Captain Chris. What has the response been like from the volunteers in terms of participating in the frequent virtual meetups?
Yeah, so the volunteer response and how much we're seeing in terms of people being a part of it is actually very similar to our seasonality of our volunteers. So we usually see a lot of volunteers in the fall, winter, and spring during periods of Niagara's downrig, uprig, and maintenance period. So early on in the pandemic, March, April, and May, I was seeing anywhere between 30 to 50 people for those Saturday morning musters, which is pretty good, and it's a great to be able to engage and keep our volunteers together in that way. And then as we started getting into June and the summer, a Saturday morning starts to become a little bit more valuable and a little bit less, pull to go on Zoom for an hour. So we've been seeing lower numbers. So we're seeing about 20, 25 people on a Saturday morning. And then our daily coffee breaks actually is generally more than what we see with people coming in during our workday when we are able to work together. So I'll see anywhere from a handful of people to some days a dozen people, especially when the weather is bad outside. So it's definitely a seasonality right now, being the summer. And I expect once we start getting into October to see a lot more volunteers participating with those online sessions. And as I start kicking back into gear with some of our virtual sail training classes too. So yeah, it's been really great. And I've gotten a lot of great feedback from volunteers that they appreciate the level of engagement, because obviously we all get in those cycles of, this is really tough not being able to see the people we're normally used to seeing, sometimes being, having to stay in our house, or just everything that's going on in the news, having a community where you can kind of re-engage and be a little bit away from that. So it's been really good, at least for me as well. As a captain who is unable to sail a ship, it's been really beneficial to me to be able to connect with our community too. So.
Well, that's great. And I want to thank you both again for reviving your session and expanding and enhancing it for the technology, the pivot to online learning. I think it's, I do think it's something that we're all going to be dealing with for some time. And I really appreciate the fact that so much of what you're talking about is useful for engagement with people in an online platform, whether it's an educational setting or a community meeting, or even, just a Zoom meeting, to make it more productive and to make it be something where people are actually engaged in the conversation. And it's, we're dealing with Zoom fatigue, I know, from a lot of people, but the more that we can do to create, options that make it exciting and make people want to be able to participate in the discussion, I think the better. So I really appreciate all of the information you provided. And just to remind everybody, we will provide an upload of the recording. It will be available tomorrow, and then we will also have the slides available so that you can take a look at those after the presentation. So if anybody has anything they'd like to share with us in a webinar or a Zoom meeting, please let us know. We're more than happy to host something like that. And thank you again, Chris and T, for sharing your experiences with everyone. And yep. Nancy Richardson, a wonderful stalwart supporter of tall ships, she says thank you very much. So she's looking forward to working with everybody on the projects in these virtual environments. So thanks, Nancy. So have a good day. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Take care.